Well, we begin with our big story. Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott sending migrants by the plane load to Chicago. The first flights arrived yesterday carrying more than 100 people. Abbott says the flights will continue and blames the situation at the southern border on President Biden. The administration says Abbott is using real people to carry out a political stunt. And Chicago's mayor says the governor is creating chaos. The migrants on that plane, including a mother, along with her husband and 3 young children. The mother says she has brain cancer, her 8-year-old leukemia.
The people who brought us here were the first to get off the plane, and we never saw them again. We only saw the flight attendant and the pilots. They were very kind, but they didn't know what was happening either.
The flights of migrants to Chicago is just the latest escalation in Governor Abbott's efforts to transport thousands of asylum seekers from communities along the U.S.-Mexico border to Democrat-led cities like Chicago. The crisis, meantime, showing no signs of slowing down. Waves of migrants arrived in Eagle Pass, Texas this week. This comes as civil rights groups challenge a controversial immigration bill that Abbott signed into law Monday, giving state and local authorities in Texas the power to arrest people suspected of illegally crossing the border. The law takes effect in March, and critics say it will lead to widespread racial profiling. ABC News foreign correspondent Matt Rivers is based in Mexico City and joins me now in New York. Matt, you, again, are based in Mexico City. You have covered the border for us for quite some time, spent a lot of time down there. So first and foremost, I just want to ask you, what is the situation like down there right now?
Well, I mean, it's unprecedented, and that's saying something, because what we've seen at the border over the last, let's say, 3 years has really been large numbers of migrants coming, but the sustained trend, the sustained day after day after day of thousands of migrants being encountered up and down the southwest border, it's unprecedented. I mean, there's really no other way to describe it. And what you're seeing in places like Eagle Pass, Texas, this is a tiny little sleepy town in the southern part of Texas, and it is being overwhelmed by the amount of migrants that we're seeing there. So wherever you fall on the political issue in all of this, what I can tell you is that the amount of people arriving to the border right now is something we've never seen before.
So back to SB 4, that law just signed by Governor Greg Abbott. Traditionally, only the federal government, as you and I have covered for a long time, enforces immigration law. Now police in Texas would be allowed to make arrests and even carry out some form of deportation. What kind of reaction have you heard from communities along the border there? And does Texas really have the manpower and the infrastructure to pull something like that off?
Yeah, so I'll take the first part of the question first there, Jay. I mean, listen to what Mexico's saying. First and foremost, because that's the country that these people would be deported back to. Mexico is saying, well, why is it our problem to solve U.S. immigration policies? They think that this U.S. law is illegal against U.S. constitutional law, against Mexican law, against international law, and against any sort of decent moral code with which you should be treating migrants. So that's what you're hearing along the border there. But then you just talk about the practicalities of this law. So what exactly is going to happen? You're going to get a law enforcement officer, let's say in North Texas, that's going to send a migrant all the way down to South Texas. We all know how big Texas is. So who's going to pay for all of that? Who's going to transport the migrants south? And then when you get the migrants south and you want to enact those deportation proceedings, well, the way that happens now is that Mexican authorities receive migrants as they cross back over these land bridges. What if Mexican officials say, you know what, we're not going to do that. We're not going to accept these migrants. We're going to not let people cross into Mexico. Well, then what happens? How is Texas going to respond to that? What is the federal government's role in all of this? What about the Border Patrol agents and the CBP officers that are staffing those ports of entry? Is Texas going to send migrants back across the Rio Grande in an illegal way into Mexico? Then they're violating Mexican law. So there are so many different practicalities here that the governor, despite talking big about this law, saying it's going to go into effect in March, how this is going to get carried out, I don't think anyone really has an idea.
Well, you mentioned talking big. I mean, the whole impetus behind SB 4 is Abbott saying that President Biden isn't doing enough at the border. And so I want to play you something. Our Mary Alice Parks pushed the White House on that exact question today. I want to play you that exchange, get your reaction on the back end. Here's that.
Can you point to one thing the White House is doing right now that is making an impact on the border, is making an impact with this current surge?
Well, one of the things that obviously it's a big part of the supplemental request. We're seeing record levels of people. More people are on the move in this hemisphere than has been the case since World War II. There's a lot of factors, and part of that is of course, dealing with instability, political and domestic instability in the region.
Okay, Matt, your take on that, particularly his notion of a lot of people on the move in the hemisphere and that notion of domestic instability.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, in each one of these countries that people are coming from has its own set of problems. So if you're looking at political persecution in Nicaragua, if you're looking at the crazy inflation rates that we're seeing in Argentina forcing people to flee, if you're looking at increasing gang violence in Ecuador, if you're looking at economic problems in a place like Guatemala or Mexico, each one of these countries has its own issues that is forcing people to head north. And that's just some of the issues that are sending people north. But this is all happening at the same time, Jay. So that is a trend that, you know, John Kirby there is right when he says that there's a lot of movement going on, unprecedented amounts in this hemisphere.
And one more thing for you while I have you. Something that's taking up a lot of my time as someone who doesn't typically sit in this chair and covers Capitol Hill is that Republicans and Democrats are still there trying to hash out a deal on immigration reform. While those talks play out, what have you heard from migrants, from Border Patrol, from advocacy groups, anybody that you've talked to in your reporting about what they would want to be included in those talks?
Everybody, the one thing that everybody can agree on is that this is very much a issue that needs funding. Whatever you want the funding for, whether it's more enforcement, whether it's more humanitarian need, whether it's more shelter, whether it's more processing and asylum processing capability, everybody agrees that what is happening at the border now needs more funding, and everyone can agree that what is happening right now at the border is a crisis in some way, shape, or form. How you want to deal with it can depend on where you fall in the political sense of things, but when you look at what's happening at the border, it's not good for migrants, it's not good for Border Patrol officials, it's not good for the governor of Texas, it's not good for the president of the United States. Everybody agrees that things need to change, and the best way you can do that is by acknowledging this is a problem and by funding it.
Yeah, Matt Rivers, so great to unpack all of this with you. So useful. Thank you, sir, for your time. I want to bring in now our big story panel, turn to them with all of this. Joining us today is ABC News contributor and Sirius XM radio host Mike Muse, ABC News contributor and former Republican congressman from New York, John Katko, ABC News contributor and former Clinton 2016 presidential campaign aide Amanda Renteria, and ABC News contributor and op-ed columnist for the LA Times, LZ Granderson. Everybody's in. Thank you for your time. John, I turn to you first here. These immigration reform talks playing out in the Senate that you heard Matt and I just talk about a little bit. Is there anything that Republicans and Democrats could agree on in the Senate, assuming that they do, that could pass in the Republican-controlled House with some of your former colleagues there, some of whom are hardliners on this issue?
Well, if you listen to the hardliners, nothing's going to get done. If you listen to hardliners on the left or the right, nothing will get done. You need a bill that's going to upset both the far left and the far right. And that's where the sweet spot to get this thing done, because we need aid to Israel, we need aid to Ukraine, and we need to secure the border. But one thing Matt didn't talk about that is a cold, hard reality is that on January 20th, when the president was sworn in, President Biden, he issued a series of executive orders that the cartels used to advertise on TikTok and Facebook and other mediums that caused a magnet for these people to come to the border, thinking that there was a different type of tone and tenor with respect to U.S. immigration on the border. So that has to change. I think the Biden administration acknowledges that. I think they're getting pounded in polling by that, and that's why they're trying to strike a grand bargain. I want them to strike that grand bargain, and I want the far left and the far right and the middle on both sides to come to the realization that anything we do to try and secure the border better and have some better security on the border is going to lead to less exploitation of the individuals coming across and will lead to a more secure border. And I think that's a good thing. And we need to get to that point. We're not there. People got to put down their swords for once and get this thing done.
Yeah, we should add here, as John just mentioned, that Republicans on Capitol Hill have said there will be no aid for Ukraine or for Israel without some kind of a deal in immigration policy. But Amanda, President Biden is facing a tight spot here, too. He said he's open to significant compromises as part of that package I was just talking about with Israel and Ukraine aid and immigration reform. But he's getting flack from Democrats in border states for not doing enough, and he's getting pressure from progressives not to cave to Republicans in those talks. Does he have a way out of this where everybody can stay happy with the eventual result?
Well, I'm not sure there's a happy place to make everyone happy on immigration. And I think that's exactly the point. which is we do need a Congress that can do the hard work, both courage and compromise, to not just figure out this moment in time, but also immigration reform largely. Now, I agree with John that this is a time and this is a moment right at the end of the year when everyone starts to like, how are we going to get this done? Where you can start to build that group, that gang of 8 or whatever it might be, to begin a real process of immigration reform. And it does start with what do you put in this bill in order to both help what is happening at the border, but also set the stage for real immigration reform as opposed to political stunts.
Are you saying talks in the Capitol are more productive when everyone's not in town? How dare you? Of course they're more productive when everyone's here. What do you mean? They're so great when they're all together. Anyway, LZ, this is going to be a serious factor in the presidential race. The situation at the border is already a serious drag on President Biden's poll numbers. Every single Republican candidate mentions this issue daily on the stump. So how do you see us playing out on the campaign trail?
Well, you know, I live in Texas and, you know, being in LA all those years, I've been covering immigration for a while. And the thing that seems to me that comes up over and over again is that we're so focused in on the border and we're not asking ourselves, why are they coming? We keep framing this as an immigration issue when really it's a refugee issue. They're fleeing. They're not coming here. They're fleeing from something. And we know that Texas governor last year, Greg Abbott, designated the cartel as a terrorist organization. And he got it to the White House asking for the same. In March, Secretary Blinken said that he was considering it. I think they need to revisit that because they need to start the root of the problem and not just keep looking at the border. Why are they coming? That's the real issue.
Yeah, and Mike, one more to you here. So migrants are being flown to Chicago, as we mentioned, but also they're being bused to New York, where you are sitting in one of our studios right now. It's causing a serious strain on resources there. So what are you hearing about the effect that this crisis is having on communities and on people who live far away from the U.S.-Mexico border?
Absolutely. It's putting a big strain on it. And continue with the cynical nature, Jay, of your previous statement, is that we now need Congress to do better at governance. We need them to address the issue of soft diplomacy and address infrastructure, education, and security so they don't come forward. We also, too, need Congress to act in order to pass funding to what you and Matt was speaking to in order to give relief to these cities, to these migrants are flowing into. But really, Jay, I think this is a call from Governor Abbott to force this issue to the Supreme Court to really re-examine Arizona versus the United States to determine if states can control immigration or we should continue to leave it to the federal government.
Mike, John, Amanda, LZ, thank you for unpacking this with us.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.